All right, let's bring in the federal political editor at the Daily Telegraph and Outsiders host, James Morrow, to discuss this and all of the day's top stories. James, look, let's start with this. It is the biggest story globally. In your view, is this a witch hunt, or does Trump legitimately deserve to face the spotlight, face the music in all of these cases?
No, look, on some of the other cases, there may very well be a case to answer, but this case that's being brought by Alvin Bragg in Manhattan is completely bogus. I saw what Alan Dershowitz said there before. This guy, Bragg, he ran for office on a Get Trump platform. That's all this is about. We've seen the leaked indictment. What we've seen so far is that he has bumped up things that are misdemeanors to Class E felonies. So the lowest level of felony, just to make a point here. Now, I think, Shari, that what this is about is actually getting Republicans to come around, rally behind Trump, because the Democrats would much rather run against him, especially if they've got Joe Biden, than against Ron DeSantis in 2024.
And we'll have more on this throughout the show, and of course my interview coming up later. James, the RBA has paused interest rates after 10 consecutive hikes, keeping them on hold at 3.6%. Is hitting pause the right decision here?
Look, they've got to walk a really fine line here between interest rates and inflation. I do think it's the right decision, not being an economist, but it does seem like they've really hammered people very hard with this. The one caveat I would make, Shari, though, interest rates hit mortgage holders, but inflation hits everybody, and it hits, those at the bottom of the ladder hardest. So we have to make the choice here. Do we want to let inflation get out of control? I don't think we do. So the RBA needs to keep a very close eye on this. And, the Albanese government also, as it prepares its budget for May, needs to be looking at cutting spending, so that it does not feed the fires of inflation any more than governments of both stripes have both done.
Absolutely. Now, Anthony Albanese confirming today that TikTok, as we know, Chinese-owned social media app, will be banned on all government devices. He said it's for security concerns. Now, the app was already purged from government phones in America, in the UK, in Canada and New Zealand as far back as November last year. James, the question is why it actually took the Albanese government so much longer, another 5 or so months.
Well, that is one question here. And we all know, Shari, that TikTok is absolutely spyware. And it also has algorithms that essentially addict people, particularly young people, and really do all sorts of terrible things to them. But the bigger question I have is, why are adults on TikTok in the first place? Why is any politician, why is any grown adult on this service to begin with? Ban it for that reason.
To reach voters, presumably.
Well, I get it to reach voters, but it's like, surely we should be, a smarter country than that, where we need to use TikTok to get our message across. My God.
Well, and that's the question. If they've banned it, and if it is not safe for politicians, then you have to ask, is it
ban
safe
it from
for
everybody?
The rest of, yeah. Well,
Get it off your phones, and if you're a parent and your kids have TikTok, get it off their phones too.
Terrifying thought. Now, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill has warned that the current global arena is as tense, she says, as 1940s Europe. Now, she stresses there's no war, there's no prospect of one at least. But James, when she says that we face the most challenging geostrategic circumstances since the Second World War, what's she referring to here?
Well, there is, of course, the war in Ukraine at the moment, but putting that aside, there is this, I think the thing that is the biggest, scariest parallel right now is the alliance between China and Russia, or the de facto friendship agreement, whatever they want to call it, between those two, which has huge echoes to me of the Ribbentrop Pact between the old Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. So, then it was Hitler and Stalin, now it's Xi and Putin. But, these sort of things tend to rhyme, and what happened there? Well, those two countries wound up, of course, fighting one another. I do think that China now feels like it has the whip hand against Russia, while we're concerned about Taiwan, quite rightfully so, and Ukraine, quite rightfully so. The geopolitics of it, I think Claire O'Neill, if she's going in the direction I think she is quite right to think that what happens between Russia and China could ultimately wind up being far more epoch-making. Remember, those two countries had a big border battle back in, I think, the 60s that came to pretty serious blows. So there's a lot of history there, and I think that's where she's going with this.
It's interesting also breaking news this afternoon that Anthony Albanese is planning a trip to China later this year. This, of course, follows Daniel Andrews, who just went to Beijing. And we've heard that Anastasia Palaszczuk is also planning a trip, Mark McGowan too. This would be very significant for Anthony Albanese. You know, do you think this would have a tangible difference in the Australia-China relationship?
Well, I mean, look, for one thing, I mean, we would hope that he would bring some of the press gallery with him, which, of course, Dan Andrews famously failed to do so. But look, jaw is better than war, as Churchill said. And if we're playing out these 30s, 40s parallels, we may as well quote the great man here. That said, you know, China will determine the relationship on its own terms. So we have to think very carefully about, you know, how much the good headlines and so on we get out of this, you know, is actually changing any of China's actual strategic thinking about it. We got to go in there eyes wide open and not be naive about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see. James Morrow, thank you for joining me.